Welcome back to Morning Express. And well, 2020 did see a number of key infrastructure projects affected. KTN Zabiagina had an incisive discussion with Sylvester Kasuku, the Director General of the Lamu Port South Sudan Ethiopia Transport Corridor project, on the hits and misses around infrastructure in 2020 and what to look forward to in the new year.
Well, the year 2020 has come to an end, and as the year counts down, many of Kenyans will be looking forward to a more prosperous 2021. One of the events that characterized this year was the infrastructure agenda. From President Uhuru Kenyatta's administration, the government has been pushing to ensure critical infrastructure is in place. Among them is the Lamu Port, that is in Lamu County, a project that has been designed to not only position Kenya strategically in matters to do with trade, but as well as a hub for employment. Well, joining me right now is Mr. Sylvester Kasuku, who is the Director General of the LAPSET project, and he'll be giving us his views around 2020 and expectations, of course, into 2021. Thank you, sir, for joining us.
Thank you.
Let's get the ball rolling. It has been an eventful year, a lot of disruptions from the pandemic that came about with the coronavirus. But from your crystal ball, would you say 2020 was a bad year for infrastructure, or was it still a good year?
Thank you, Abi. What I can say is that the year 2020 was indeed a challenging year, considering that this is the year that the COVID pandemic struck the world. And it didn't leave any enclave of the world a safer place. But it indeed caused a disruption to many economies around the globe. And what I would like to say is that in terms of infrastructure, we have kept the faith as the government to deliver on key and strategic infrastructure, albeit the challenges that have come with the COVID, particularly on the limited resource envelope that the government has, considering that revenues have continued to fall. The infrastructure agenda has actually been well executed. And I would like to say that even if you look at the Lamu Port project, you'll realize that construction works have continued throughout the COVID period, because government took enough action, it took enough measures and put into place a number of strategies to ensure that the construction site for the port remained safe and secure. And that has enabled us to deliver immensely. I would like to say that across the board,
yes,
infrastructure has actually been well executed as an enabler to many sectors of the economy under Vision 2030, as well as the big four priority agenda, mainly manufacturing, affordable healthcare, affordable housing, and as well as other areas that have been prioritized by government.
All right.
And I would like to say that infrastructure is actually an enabler of all these agendas and all sectors of the economy. So the delivery and the continued, what I would like to say is that the continued delivery of infrastructure has actually been impressive. You've seen the Nairobi Expressway, you've seen the Liwatoni Bridge, you've seen the construction of roads that are linking Kenya with its neighboring countries, particularly the road going to South Sudan, whose construction works are actually moving in top gear. The road from Lamu, Garsen, that is connected to B8, is actually moving in top gear and is expected to be completed by March 2021.
Interesting. And Mr. Kasuku, of course, it goes without saying that indeed the work has been cut out for the government when it comes to delivery of key infrastructure projects. Talk to us about the significance of the projects we've seen in 2020 all the way leading up to 2021. What are some of the economic dividends that we should anticipate? And of course, what are the challenges in the pipeline?
Basically, if I were to begin with the largest, or what I would call the most significant project that is the Lamu port, which is actually heralding the largest port on the east coast of the African continent, with quite a great capacity compared to many other ports in the continent and globally. This port is actually providing us with the opportunity to provide a global maritime logistics platform in Kenya that will actually prime Kenya as a major logistics environment for the entire continent. Not just Kenya or East Africa alone, but many other jurisdictions are actually going to benefit from this particular infrastructure when it goes live in the year 2021. And among many other projects, just one which is very close to you here, the expressway, I would like to say that this is again going to redefine mobility within the city. It will provide for a more superior infrastructure that will support movement, so that the issue of jam and limited accessibility maybe to key areas such as the airport, the CBD, among many other business areas, is actually going to be now managed in a better way, because there will be options of how people are going to move on these particular roads within the city. If we were to talk about the roads that are being constructed mainly in areas that are where we are opening new frontiers for economic growth and development going forward, particularly in northern Kenya, in the coastal areas, we are seeing that these infrastructures are actually creating new economic enclaves where we are expecting to create more jobs. Already during the construction period, we've seen a lot of jobs created. For example, if you take Lamu Port, you will realize that the numbers are usually between 800 and 1,200 workers at any one time, finding meaningful employment at the construction site. And these projects are numerous, and these are going to open new investment areas, they are going to open new living areas, they are going to open new production areas, and they're also going to open new revenue generation areas for our country. And with the cross-border infrastructure, definitely we are creating a sense of integration. We are strengthening the integration agenda, which is again Vision 2063 under the African Union.
Yes.
As well as improving safety and security under the agenda of what is called silencing the guns by the 2063. So we've seen that a number of areas that lack access have been experiencing issues of insecurity, particularly if you look at the central part of Africa, among many others. And even within our country, particularly areas where you find infrastructure lacking, then you realize that you find elements of conflicts. And once infrastructure is put up, for example, if you can look at the case of the Isiolo to Moyale Road, you realize that peace becomes the normal, the new normal, and you don't see any conflicts anymore. If you look at how conflicts used to occur between the area of Isiolo and Moyale, before this road was constructed, there were quite vigorous conflicts. Yes. But today you barely hear of any. Movement that used to take about 3 days to reach Moyale is today taking 7 hours, 8 hours. Within the same day, you leave Moyale and you are able to be in Nairobi in quite within a very short period of time. Resources that are found in these areas, mainly livestock, that we've seen being consumed in many parts of the country, particularly Nairobi. I can say that about 60% of livestock products that are consumed within the areas of Nairobi and the environs actually emanate from these particular areas. And as we speak, access to markets has improved. And as we go into the 2021, when Lamu Port will open and the Ethiopians find a gateway through Lamu Port, then we will see strengthening of cross-border trade. So I would like to say that the issue of the infrastructure agenda that have been pursued during the year 2020, which has been a challenging year due to COVID issues, has actually given us a sense of strength and a sense of resilience to be able to come out of the effects of the COVID pandemic going into the year 2021.
Interesting, DG. And looking at the big picture, of course, the LAPSSET project is tipped to be a game changer, not only for Kenya, but the larger Eastern and Southern Africa. I'd like to pick your mind, especially looking at this project. It has had so many hitches when it comes to funding challenges. Some countries never put in what was required as a way of support. Can we say the same of the project today? Are we seeing a change of heart, especially among our neighboring countries such as Ethiopia as well as South Sudan?
Avi, I would like to say that sometimes looking at this particular project with the lens of our media house, you might be seeing challenges, even areas where we are not seeing challenges. With regard to funding, it might interest you to know that the government of Kenya is actually financing this project on its own. There is no loan on this project, as often rumored or as often assumed by the general public, or as assumed by maybe media houses, that any big project that the government is doing, it must be borrowing. This particular project is financed directly by the Exchequer through dedication of resources under the
How much are we talking
budgets.
about so far?
We are talking about over 50 billion shillings, directly being financed by the government. And this is a mega project. It's quite mega. It is breaking ground in terms of creating new investment areas and actually giving the country a more advantageous edge when it comes to global maritime logistics business.
All right.
So this is indeed, it's a kind of a new economic dawn project. It's a kind of an economic sunrise project for the country. And the country has showed its confidence in this project by putting its own money in this particular project.
Speaking of the economic sunrise, of course, we've seen visits by the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Abiy, visiting Kenya. Very interesting strategic issues coming up when you look at the diplomatic aspects of it. We've also seen South Sudan have been rather quiet about the project. Would you say it is more about a coalition of the willing, or are we seeing countries converging to ensure that the dreams are realized come the timelines that we had set out?
Abiy, I would like to say that many a times we have had discussions, with the media teams. And we've also seen a number of analyses being done about the LAPSSET corridor programs, projects. In particular, when we see stronger regional cooperation taking place, like when Ethiopia makes peace with Eritrea, speaks to Djibouti, speaks to Somalia, and then you hear a number of analysts saying that now that these countries are talking to other countries, then Kenya must be losing. That is far from the truth. What I would like to say is that the idea about infrastructure development is not a preserve of one country alone. But the more we build infrastructure that integrates the continent, the more we create value proposition in our economies. And the more we achieve much more cross-border trade. So what I would like to say is that the visit by the Ethiopian Prime Minister couldn't have come at a better time than now, considering that we are nearing the completion of the port project. And we do know very well that the LAPSSET corridor is actually the Lamu Port South Sudan Ethiopia Transport Corridor. And we know that there is an effective market area within Ethiopia, particularly the southern part below Addis. And this is actually one of the most productive parts of Ethiopia, with a huge population, almost more than Kenya's population. And therefore, by creating a connecting infrastructure through roads and opening up a port that can serve Ethiopia and effectively the southern part of Ethiopia. We are indeed strengthening regional integration, economic integration. We are also strengthening cross-border trade or bilateral trade. We are also strengthening, the opening up of new opportunities, particularly in the region. We know that Ethiopia, with over 110 million people, Kenya with close to 50 million people, have not been trading very strongly, considering that we did not have a connecting road infrastructure. But today, we have a connecting road infrastructure, having built the Isiolo-Moyale Road, and also answering your earlier question about the commitment by our regional partners in delivering LAPSSET. Ethiopia is also constructing close to 800 kilometers of roads on the LAPSSET corridor. This is the road from Addis Ababa to Mojo to Hawassa, and then from Hawassa to Moyale. And they are more or less through getting through with it. And this is going to strengthen not just the delivery of the LAPSSET infrastructure, but is also going to strengthen cross-border trade. It's going to strengthen cross-border investments. It's going to strengthen, bilateral economic cooperation between the two countries. And of great interest is the population that is found across, the two countries' borders. You find that there is a sense of homogeneity. And as such, the people on the Kenyan side have relations with the people on across the border on the other side. So sometimes having kept these two countries unconnected was actually creating a disconnect between the people who are socio-culturally linked to a great extent. So we are looking forward to much brighter prospects in the year 2021.
All right. And let's move this conversation forward, Mr. Kasuku. Of course, January also will be marking a very important calendar in our year, because the Africa Free Trade Continental Area Agreement will be taking effect. How ready are we as African countries, and specifically Kenya, of course, buttressing all this with all the amazing developments we are seeing in infrastructure and the maritime logistics networks?
Abby, I would like to say that the Continental Free Trade Area could not have come at a much better time than now. We are aware that by championing the Free Continental Trade Area framework, we are actually strengthening regional integration within Africa, which is an AU agenda under 2063 delivery timelines. And we are actually going to see a framework for faster integration. But of great interest is the limited nature of infrastructure that is going to allow the countries to be much, much more integrated under the CFTA. And by building this cross-border infrastructure that we are building now, we are actually readying ourselves in a much better way than before to be able to reap from the benefits of the CFTA. And we've seen that development of cross-border infrastructure to integrate various regions is not just happening in East Africa alone. But we've seen that it is something being championed even under the African Union, under what is called Program for Infrastructure Development for Africa. And under this particular program, African leaders have come together to appreciate the need to build integrating infrastructure. And it has been observed that by the year 2040, African countries will have spent something close to $360 billion to put up requisite infrastructure, to integrate the continent, and also to ready the continent for industrialization. As I've said before, the African continent has had a rather flat story about industrialization, in that all the three industrial revolution series, Africa was always documented to have not industrialized. But under the fourth industrial revolution, which is taking root now, Africa is actually solving the problems that made it not industrialized in the last 3 industrial revolutions. Number one is infrastructure. Africa lacked appropriate and requisite infrastructure to enable it to industrialize. Number two, Africa lacked the human capital that could have shepherded the process for industrialization. Number three, Africa lacked technology that could have supported its industrial development process. But we've seen that today, technology is a global phenomenon, and technology can be found off the shelf, technology can be adapted. And with the advent of ICT, among many other things, you've seen that the African continent is actually picking up much faster. If you've seen how efficient and how robust the M-Pesa technology has actually revolutionized movement of money and supporting trade up to including the deep rural areas and money transfer systems. We've seen how the use of ICT, particularly during this particular COVID season, whereby we adapted and quickly came to terms that whereas physical meetings were not possible,
yes,
we were able actually to move into the era of doing virtual meetings. High-level government meetings, government-to-business meetings, business-to-government meetings, business-to-business meetings, and all these have been done virtually across the board, whether they are global meetings, whether they are regional meetings, whether they are intragovernmental meetings, intergovernmental meetings. And this has actually created a new framework, a new resilience to be able to manage a challenging environment of the nature of the COVID pandemic situation.
Interesting. And Mr. Kasuku, as we come to the tail end of our discussion, of course, our time is far much spent. But once LAPSSET is delivered fully, what next? What other projects should the country be considering? Are we in talks with other like-minded partners? And of course, talk to us about the funding framework. We've seen many African governments hitting hurdles when it comes to delivery of infrastructure. Are there new funding options on the table? As you also take us, giving us your closing thoughts around what next for the LAPSSET team.
Thank you very much, Abi. Definitely, as I've said before, where many governments find challenges, for us in Kenya, we see opportunities. And we do know that resources are never enough. Resources are limited. And particularly, resources that are generated by the government in private, under public sector resource mobilization framework. And we've seen that the need for resources or areas that are requiring resources are so many versus the limited resource envelope that is available in the budget.
Yes.
And as such, the government has come up with various instruments to be able to mobilize resources from up to including private sector, so that areas which were previously the domain of government, for example, in infrastructure investments, the government has actually come up with the PPP frameworks, among many other frameworks, that allow private sector to come and invest, particularly in areas that make economic sense to private sector, so that we are not just struggling on our own as the government, but we are tapping on the advantage of the private sector business interest to be able to deliver some of the critical infrastructure among many other development areas. For example, one of the newest projects that has attracted private sector investment is the Nairobi Expressway. You realize that the amounts of money that could have been put on that particular project could have created quite a great strain on government budget, and as well as the road between Nairobi, Nakuru, Mau Summit,
yes,
which has also attracted private sector investors, because looking at their viabilities, they actually make business sense to private sector. And in that particular event, therefore, the government finds a great partnership, opportunity from private sector who are willing to invest in government, spearheaded development agenda. And going forward, I'm seeing greater prospects of private sector continuing to take advantage of the opportunities that the government is providing to invest in areas where the government has created a sense of priority, but also making sense to private sector business interest.
All right.
Particularly on the issue of, you spoke about the issue that now that we are delivering LAPSSET corridor projects, are we going to finish and then are we therefore going to maybe sit back, or we are going to take new challenges?
Yes.
I would like to say that the LAPSSET corridor projects that are being spearheaded by government are actually not just a one-off thing, but I would like to say that they are quite heavy projects with very strategic plans in place that will go on for a much longer period in terms of their implementation. For example, we are now delivering the first 3 berths of Lamu Port. We are still having a balance of over 20 berths that need to be delivered, which therefore means that under the financing arrangement where we are tapping the private sector investment opportunities, what the government has done is therefore going to be seen as a catalyst to private sector interest to invest in Lamu Port, to put up the rest of the berths that are remaining. So having gone to the ground first, the government has merely broken ground. The government has made the port, a business, an ongoing business, so that it's not just a place where the private sector is going to sink their money in an area that has not been invested into by government. So the government has therefore sunk money to be able to provide for a number of facilities that are going to provide a sense of concession to private sector to invest in the remaining berths.
All right.
The creation of the channel, provision of navigational aids, as well as putting in place the first 3 berths that are now attracting more investments into that area. Then we now create an attractive environment for private sector. With regard to areas like railway, which will come on much later, looking at resort cities, again, this will be developed over a much longer period of time. If you looked at how resort cities are developed around the globe, take an example of Sharm el-Sheikh. You wouldn't really finish putting up a resort city, because the more you put up, the more you also create the appetite to continue to come up with new menus or new investment opportunities for private sector within that same environment.
Exactly.
More roads will still be constructed in northern Kenya. More power generation projects will continue to be done in northern Kenya. You've seen the 50 megawatt solar power plant in Garissa. You've seen the 300 megawatts wind power plant in Turkana area. And there are many, many other wind power and solar power projects and geothermal power projects within the LAPSSET corridor.
These are lifetime projects, as you rightly put them. And I'm afraid that's why we have to bring it to a close. Mr. Sylvester Kasuku, Director General of the LAPSSET, just giving us the highlights of 2020 and expectations into 2021. He's quite optimistic that 2021 will be the year that he has dubbed the season of economic dawn for infrastructure. Well, it's only but a question of time as we continue to wait and see. Well, thank you so much for your valid company. That's where we wrap it up. And we do wish you a happy 2021 and keep safe, social distance.